Today's episode of the Mental Health and Faith, a Closer Look program contains some sensitive information, and I wanted to just give you a heads up. We will be speaking about my guest's experience with childhood rape as a boy, addiction, and other forms of trauma. This will be balanced out with an amazing story of recovery and hope. But if you at any time feel triggered or uncomfortable or distressed about the information that's being shared, please exit the episode and come back at another time. There is hope. There is recovery. There is joy in life. And that's really the message that we want to share today. Hi, this is Carolyn Cooper, and welcome to the Mental Health and Faith, a Closer Look podcast and YouTube show. Here we discuss topics around mental health and wellness, mental illness, recovery, and faith, all from a Christian perspective. Now, if you have any topic ideas, or if you'd like to be interviewed for this program, just send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Now sit back and enjoy the show. Hi, this is Carolyn Cooper, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Mental Health and Faith, a Closer Look podcast and YouTube show. And today I have a very special guest with me. I met this man at a mental health conference. It was the Real Voices, Real Choices conference, I believe. Is that right, Scott?
Yes.
And that is a peer-led conference for people who live with mental, physical, and developmental disabilities, as well as substance use disorders. We were both there. I met him when he was talking about a book he has, which we'll mention here at the end of our time together. But I was just very impressed with his dedication to living a recovery lifestyle. And that's really what I want to hear about today. But Scott, why don't you first give a little bit more information about who you are?
Well, thank you so much again for having me on. It's just an honor and privilege. Well, my name is Scott Hartman. I'm in recovery from a lot of years of drug addiction. And at that conference, I didn't even know about it. And a friend of mine had that booth that had the drinks and said, "Hey, why don't you come on down?" So, and that's so.
And those were, I'm just going to interrupt real quick to say, healthy drinks.
Yes,
The
yes.
booth was healthy drinks. And
Yes,
I had
yes,
one
yes.
and it was delicious.
Yeah, it was exciting to be there. I hope to be there next year. I just celebrated 7 years of being clean December 19th.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I was in the madness for 30 years. I was homeless, living on the streets, and for 2 or 3 years I was bouncing around from couch to couch, no electricity, no water, just a mess. But that was just a symptom of, because when I grew up, I was beat as a kid, I was raped as a kid, I had a lot of abandonment, and I was mentally abused. So I resorted to violence at first, and then alcohol and drugs to cope with that. Because I didn't want to think and I didn't want to feel. And anytime something bad happened, I was getting high. Anytime something good happened, I was getting high, because that was just my way of life for so many years. And when I was high or drunk, I didn't have to think about anything. I didn't have to feel, other than the effects of what the alcohol and drugs did. And the first 10 years of it was amazing. I'm not going to say amazing. That's not I had a lot of fun. But then after that, then the pain really set in. The misery really set in, because I couldn't function my daily life without having something in my system. Because when I was depressed, I knew if I got high, that depression was gone. Mm-hmm. Even though I was miserable, because I and nobody that I was in a relationship with, my family for a long time, nobody knew that I was an addict. I hid it very well. I was still, up until about the last 3 years, I still worked. But I manipulated and I was a narcissist, um, just to get what I wanted. So on the outside, everything was fine. On the inside, I was just a crying little boy. Um, went through the depression stage, and I went through the anger and the hurt. Didn't like it, so staying high was the way to do it. And now, since I've been in recovery and got clean, at first I didn't like dealing with the emotions. I hated them, and now I embrace them. It and luckily I don't have. I was blessed. I'm not bipolar. I don't. I think everybody deals with a little bit of depression. I think everybody does.
Yes,
Um,
I agree.
but it's just a matter of, um, I have the coping skills to deal with that. First I give it to God, you pray, and then I have accountability people, a sponsor, the whole 9 yards. But dealing with being raped, especially in the 80s as a young boy, you don't talk about it because
Right.
nobody's going to believe you. They're going to laugh at you. So there was a lot of dark secrets that I had to deal with.
Do you want to share a little bit more about that experience? Maybe encourage some other people who may be listening?
After it happened, and I started acting up at school really bad. I mean, real bad. I was constantly getting suspended, and I wish the teachers or the counselors would have said, "Hey, Scott, what's wrong? What's going on?" Now, would I have said something to him? I don't know, but
Hmm.
at least give me that opportunity to make that decision. And what I've seen since I've been in recovery and I've been able to talk about it, there's been men that say thank you for sharing that because it happened to them and they just didn't know how to deal with it. And it's something that I think more and more people are talking about, but men need to know that it's okay to talk about. You're
Hmm.
not going to be judged. You're not going to be, um, it wasn't your fault. There was nothing you did to provoke that. And it goes for women too. And women don't want to talk, but as a man, it's so freeing to finally get that out. And I think it needs to be brought more into the schools because I think there's a lot of kids that are dealing with that right now that don't know where to turn and don't know how to deal with it.
I think I think that is a great point because unfortunately, a lot of times when boys act up growing up, it's just, oh, they're just being boys. And, when girls act up, there may be a little more attention brought to it because girls are supposed to be nice and sweet and polite and all of that. And there really is this, I think, a huge stigma against men who claim to be raped because it doesn't seem logical just because of the way our society is. I think that, we expect the men to be the ones, and maybe that's an old-fashioned feeling, but I know that's how it was, in my growing up years and such. The men were the ones in control.
Yep. We're
But
supposed to be the alpha male, even growing up. We're supposed to be learning to be men. Um, but there's a lot of stuff that happened to young men growing up by family members, by um, a family friend or whatever that is swept under the rug.
mhm.
That you know don't say anything because nobody's going to believe you anyway. Don't say anything, or it's only going to get worse, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, and it's sad, and it's the stigma. It's getting better, but it's still there because, and I'm not an expert in any of this. I just from what I've seen in my recovery and dealing with so many people from such a broad spectrum, that I would say 90% of the time when a kid is acting up, it's not boys being boys.
Mhm.
They're hiding something. They're trying to deal with something, some type of trauma that's happened.
Yes,
And it's heartbreaking.
it
Um,
is.
do I wish it never happened to me? Absolutely, on one hand. But on the other hand, it's also made me who I am today. And I'm good with that. I remember I was in a treatment center. I was about 6 months clean, I guess. And I was talking, and there was like 20 guys in there. And there was one guy that his head down was like this. And I was thinking he
Mm.
was falling asleep. He wasn't paying attention. And I'm going, okay, how can I get everybody's attention? And as soon as I mentioned that I was raped, I thought his neck was going to break and his head hit the wall. And he was paying attention.
Mm.
And at the end, he came up and thanked me. He said, I didn't know how to deal with it because I too was raped as a kid. He said, you gave me hope.
Scott, I want to go back to something you mentioned about this whole experience. And you said that it was very freeing when you were able to start talking about this, the rape that happened. Can you talk a little bit more about that free feeling that you have and encourage the people listening to think about freedom that they can find?
Absolutely. I had to take, when I was in treatment and then I got out and I was doing outpatient, they recommended I do take a class on PTSD.
Yes.
Um, so I started taking his class and I was the only one showing up. So the counselor,
Mm.
the therapist was amazing. She said, why don't we start doing one-on-ones? So I started meeting her twice a week, hated her and loved her at the same time.
Yes.
Um,
In other words, she
because
was a good therapist.
she was to the point that it took me 5 years in my recovery to find her because she left the treatment center I went to. I found her at another treatment center and I shot her a message and said, thank you,
Mm. Mhm.
because that woman changed my life because I had to deal with um, not only the rape, but the physical abuse and some mental stuff that all went with all everything. So being able to talk about it and the stigma or the saying men don't cry. Oh, I was bawling like a baby. Um, and it was the best tears I've ever had.
Mhm.
The hardest thing that I had to do was to be able to forgive the man who did it. Um, once I realized what forgiveness actually meant and was, then it made it easier. I wasn't forgiving him for him. I
Right.
was forgiving him for me, for my sense of peace. You know, I didn't do anything to provoke it. I didn't, it wasn't anything that I did to say, hey, come do that to me.
Mhm.
Um, so not only forgiving him, just forgiving myself for holding on to that for so long, if that makes any sense.
It makes
That,
I've experienced childhood trauma as well. And so I'm relating to everything you're saying, which is why this is really inspiring to me to hear another person who's been through similar kinds of things. And I think you're explaining trauma really well. So people that are listening can get an idea of the fact that, first of all, going through a trauma, you are not the one responsible. You didn't cause it. You didn't choose it. You didn't say, hey, I think I'd like to have this happen to me today. It was totally out of your control. And then you're left with the damage that's done.
yes,
And I love hearing how you worked with a therapist. I used EMDR to go through my trauma. EMDR is an acronym for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. That is what I used for my trauma healing. But like you said, it was so freeing. It was it was the best tears I'd ever cried. I relate to that. And anyway, I'll let you get back to your story, but I'm I'm really enjoying hearing this, and I hope people listening are starting to understand a little bit more about the serious nature of trauma.
Oh, 100%. And it's funny that you mentioned the EMDR. A couple years ago, there was I dealt with a lot of trauma that didn't happen to me personally, but
Mm-hmm.
I was involved with
Mm-hmm.
other people. There was a lot of I unfortunately saw a few deceased bodies.
Oh,
And there was a period where like one week I lost 7 people for overdoses, and then a week later I lost 7 more. So it was just a combination. And there was a we were at Celebrate Recovery one night, and I saw the recovery pastor now right in front of me. um, she was dead for 30 minutes,
oh,
and now she's a recovery pastor to church. God brought her
wow.
back, and
God,
it was
that's
just
amazing.
it's stuff that you only read about in the Bible. Do you know what I mean? So
Yes, yes.
when I saw that, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So a friend of mine is a very strong Christian counselor, and we started. I said, "Look, I got to talk," which brings me to this:
Mm-hmm.
men, especially men, when things happen, it's okay to ask for help.
Yes.
And a lot of times we don't think that. So I started talking to her, and she said, "Let's try some EMDR therapy. You're the expert. Let's do it." Um, in the midst of doing that, it brought up more trauma from my childhood that I had buried and forgot about,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to like my teenage or my early 20s, that is still affecting me today, that I didn't
Wow.
realize it was affecting me subconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
So we're dealing with that right now. Um, and I'm good with that. I'm not ashamed. I don't feel any guilt, um, because I'm moving forward and I'm dealing with it in a healthy way. And I think, you see people get into recovery, and everybody says, "Well, you got a few years under your belt. Everything should be good, and you shouldn't be dealing with life." It's not the case.
No.
It's not the case. So I'm in the process of. We stopped it for a minute. We're getting ready to start back up. So I'm in the process of dealing with some PTSD that I didn't know I was dealing with, and stuff that happened since I've been in recovery.
You know,
Um,
I think the nature, again, it goes back to the nature of trauma. And what you're sharing is, I think people need to be aware of this. It is very possible to deny something and hide it and stuff it away and not even remember or recognize that you have gone through something that affects you so deeply and profoundly. And what I love hearing from you is that because you had already done a lot of work on some of the trauma you had, you're ready, you're ready to go on this next batch of trauma. But
oh, absolutely. I
yes,
want to deal with it, hit it head on.
but pe
Um,
people that are starting it for the first time in the very beginning, it's so important for you all to know. And what Scott is beautifully expressing, it takes time. Some people may go through a year of intense therapy and be great, and that's good. They worked it out, they're good. Some people, it may take years. Some
it's a
people,
work.
it may take decades for some people just because of the nature of trauma. But anyway, so yes, I'm so happy for you that you are working through this next round. It's also that we can be better better representatives of Christ, in my opinion, by being in a healthier place.
Amen. I just want people to know that one, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to be dealing with that. And when you're just reach out for help
Mhm.
and don't feel ashamed. Don't feel um, you don't feel any judgment. Get the help you need to get the healing that you need. Okay. Um, did it suck? Absolutely. I
Mhm.
hated it and loved it at the same time. But anything in life that is worth having, you're going to have to fight for. And sometimes you got to fight through that trauma. You got to fight through those emotions to get that peace. And in the process of that whole journey and my recovery is when I started going to church, is when I started building my relationship with Jesus.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
it and Jesus put people in my life when I needed it to help me get through that past pain, to get through that past trauma, and to let me know that it's okay. It's okay to have these feelings and it's okay to feel the way you feel. Let's work through it together. Let's work through it. Um, and there was a time where I thought God forgot about me. I
Mhm.
thought he was punishing me. I thought that he wasn't answering any of my prayers, and because he wasn't, but I wasn't praying the right way and I was still acting a fool.
Yeah. Yes. I've been there.
Um, um, so now I give, it's all about Jesus. I give him all the credit. My
I
thing with that is I just got to get out of my own way.
I think I think the difference between someone who is going through this on their own, that doesn't know the Lord, that's not a Christian, to me, the difference is when I have God with me, I have a supernatural power. When I can't do it myself, I know that God's going to be there and help me and sustain me and push me along. He is my reason for living. And he is the one that supplies, like you said, people in my life, the power to overcome, the ability to recognize that the next right decision is a victory. All of those things, I agree with you. It's because of my relationship with the Lord. And I'm so glad to hear you express that because I honestly don't know how people have lasting, ongoing recovery without that foundation of faith.
Well, a big thing is when a lot of people when they get into recovery, it's okay, if God is real, why did all this stuff happen?
Yes.
If God is real, why did I go down that path? But what they don't realize is that God gives people free will,
Yes.
and I had to learn that. But if you can sit back and look at all like for me, if I can sit back and look at like all the times in my addiction when I should have been dead, when I was robbed, when I was held at gunpoint. I mean, I could go on and on and
Mm.
on.
Hmm.
It wasn't luck or coincidence that I was there. That was God's angels protecting me.
Yes.
Um, but it was a process that I had to learn. So when I come across somebody that says I have an issue with God, okay, I did too. Let's figure out the why and let's get to the solution.
Yeah.
Let's work through that. Let's plant the seed, and Jesus is going to come through and water it.
Hmm.
Um, so it's, but I give everything to God.
Yeah.
It's if I think I can do it on my own, I'm in trouble.
It's
So,
the first step in the 12 steps. I am powerless. We
amen.
So, well, I
Well,
want to make sure we only have a couple of minutes left here, Scott, and I want to give a quick plug for a book that you have, and I'm going to have information in the show notes all about Scott and his book and his work. And I've already told him he's going to come back for another episode, which I'm very excited about. But I'm going to turn it back to you for a couple of minutes to share a little about this book that you have.
well, I appreciate that. And I know we talked before that if we talked about the book, amen. If not, this was all about the show and your listeners. So, I'd started journaling when I was in recovery, and there was no intentions of a book at all. And people said, well, you need to write one. And I said a prayer, and it took me a couple years. But I ended up publishing it about a year ago on Amazon, and it talks about my whole story, where I started living in Germany with the physical abuse and how it all went through the addiction process, relationships, where the addiction took me, where my thinking was, and then it went into my recovery and my walk with Jesus. So it's just been a blessing, and I did have it right. I mean, it's right there. I don't know.
What's the name of it?
It is From Chasing Dope to Pushing Hope: My Steps to Recovery and Redemption.
Awesome.
So it's just about giving hope, but it also helps family members. I've been told that it helps family members understand where their loved ones are, what they're thinking.
And that's so important. Well, Scott, thank you again for being here today. I have loved our time together, and you will be back. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. I appreciate you being here, and may God bless you in your journey. And one big takeaway, please know if you need help, it's available for you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and don't forget there's even more information in the show notes. You'll want to check those out. Now, please join the conversation on mental health and faith. Leave your comments or send me an email with your thoughts, questions, or suggestions. I really look forward to hearing from you. May God bless your journey.